Howdy, and welcome to another edition of Plastic Models by Regular Dude. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about the next kit I'm going to build and how it fits into my scheme of helping beginners. Today's topic and the kit I'm going to be building is the Panzerkampfwagen 4 Ausf D. It is an older Tamiya kit, originally molded in 1975, I believe, and because of that, it kind of gets a bad rap as far as modern standards, because there are kits that are more highly detailed and complex, but that's not necessarily a good thing for beginners. And I'll talk about why this gets, kind of a bad rap in a minute. I'm not going to do a full-on review of this kit. There's tons of them on YouTube and on the internet, so I'm just going to basically talk about the highlights and what to look for as a beginner and what to look for when you choose that first kit, and why I am using this kit as an example. One reason I bought this kit is I have built tons of German armor, but I've never built one in gray. This will be my first gray Panzer. All the ones I've ever built have been mid-late war versions that are painted in, or desert versions which are painted in a yellow color. So this gray will be a first for me, and I'm kind of looking forward to it. So without further ado, let's jump into the kit here and talk about what we got in the box. First, you have the instructions. You have a Japanese version, which we won't be looking at because I don't speak Japanese or read it. And then you have the English and German language version of the instructions. The front, you have basically the box art. Down here, you have information on the subject, in this case Panzer IV. Gives you some background, development, history, stuff like that. Inside, you'll see that it has these nice line illustrations. It's called Variation of Panzerkampfwagen 4, and it just kind of points out some of the different details depending on where the vehicle is operating. The first page of the actual instructions says read before assembly. So you read this. It says study instructions and photographs before commencing assembly. Okay, that's the most important thing. You can read the rest of that, whatever. But you want to go through all the instructions before you build the kit, because you want to determine which version of this Panzer IV you want to make. On the back page of the instructions, or almost the back page, there is a page that it's called painting and applying decals, and that will partially determine which version you're going to build. In this case, there's 4 different ones you can build. There's one that operated on the Polish front, one the Battle of France, one the Balkan front, and then the African front. And the differences between the vehicles mainly are the decals and markings. The African version is painted in a different color, but the rest are all painted gray. So you'll want to determine which version you want to build, because that will determine which decals and stuff you put on it at the end. And it will also determine some of the details that you will be installing in construction. Case in point, it shows here there are different engine deck layouts you can use. Some of them use solid engine access hatches. Some of them use louvered, depending on where it fought. So you'll want to determine which version you want to build, and then pay attention to the detail explanations in the instructions, so you'll know which parts to use for a particular version. So in this case, these parts will be used in the African version. These parts will be used in early version. Okay, so you need to know which version you want to build before you get going. Then you just follow the instructions. Also, on this first page of the actual build instructions, it will give you the color callouts, all the different colors you should need to build this kit, and matte black, metallic gray, etc. So you'll want to know what colors you need. Make sure you have those on hand when you're ready to paint. Then in the instructions, it will, when you see this little symbol here, that denotes paint. You know, you're gonna have to paint something. In this case, matte black for the tires on the road wheels. Okay. They also include like a little miniature sidebar here on the figures. You know, how to build the figures and how to paint them. And then it has a little photograph right here. Oh, can't see it. You have a photograph right here showing the painted model with the painted figures installed, so you kind of know what it looks like. So that's basically it on the instructions. You just want to make sure you pay attention to which version you're wanting to build and build accordingly. And then one last note on the instructions that I really like, especially when I was starting with modeling way back when, is Tamiya. I don't know if all manufacturers do this, and I don't know if Tamiya still does it, but they have each sprue. They're always labeled with a letter. That way you know which sprue whenever you're pulling the parts. But different letters for each sprue, and each part on the sprue has a different number. Then on the left here, it gives you this nice list of what a particular part is on a particular sprue. So for instance, you know, you're going through and it's like, oh, that's protection rail. B19 is protection rail. B18 is a cartridge case receptacle. Number 17 is a turret top plate. It just names them all out, so it kind of helps you learn what the parts are called as you're building. So I think that's kind of neat. Some people don't really, you know, aren't as concerned, but I like it because I like to know what the parts are and what they do. So that's kind of nice. So let's take a look at the actual kit itself. A few things. One thing I will note is the tracks. There are different types of tracks. There are this type, which is either called, some people call them rubber band tracks, some people call them belt tracks. Basically it's a long strip of vinyl, or on some of the more modern kits, a flexible styrene that is looped together to form the track. And the way these older Tamiya tracks work is there are, let's see if I can do this so you can see it. There are pins on this end, 4 pins, and then 4 holes. And what you do is you loop the track around, put it together, poke the pegs through the holes, and you end up with this. Then you heat those little pegs. You can either use a heated screwdriver or knife, or you can just apply a little bit of heat and mash it down with your finger, but that creates your joint. And that's one of the things that some people don't like about vinyl tracks, is you have that weird joint right there, which could make a guide tooth be missing, like right there. But there's ways to get around that, and I'll talk about that during assembly. As for the parts themselves, first thing I'll talk about is the hull. And the reason I'm going to talk about the hull, especially the lower hull, is that this is, I think, one of the reasons why this particular model gets a bad rap. In where'd it go? 1975, when this kit was first molded, a popular thing to do with these was to have a motor, so you could have an electric motor so you could, you know, run it across the carpet or desk or whatever. There was a motor up front, a little electric motor, had an axle that went all the way through, then attached to the drive sprockets. It had a switch right here you can flip on from the bottom, 2 spots for batteries. Now I think because of that, and making the accommodation for the motor and batteries, they had to mold this lower hull in proportions that weren't to scale with the real tank that the real Panzer IV. So if you were to scale down a real Panzer IV and not have all this stuff, maybe it'd be a little bit narrower. I don't know. But that's one of the complaints I've heard about in reviews, is the proportions are incorrect. That said, considering this is an old kit and considering the level of detail, it's still a good value because these are really inexpensive. You can find these almost everywhere. They still make them. They're inexpensive, so it's not a big investment in your first or second or third or whatever armor kit. And when you get finished, if you were to ask anybody, even the most nitpicky person, ask them what is this, they'll tell you it's a Panzer IV. Okay. So you can worry about detail and dimensions and stuff later if you want, but this is a good kit to get started. There's more parts here. This is the next sprue. The only thing I'm really going to point out on this is that this one comes with a figure right there. And for an old kit, this is a really nice figure. It's pretty cleanly detailed. It looks good. It's got a little bit of mold lines on the body. Those are easily fixed. But it's nice that they include figures. Not all companies include figures with their kits. And the nice thing about it is it helps add a little bit of scale and a little bit of interest to the model. Then you have, more parts, whole parts, some wheels, the rest of the figures. And basically, there's 4 sprues of parts. I don't want to get into detail again. We'll talk about some of the individual parts later when we're actually putting this together. And I might talk about some particulars about given parts as they come up. The last thing I want to talk about in this kit are the decals. And the decals are really quite nice. Tamiya decals are known to be somewhat thick. The carrier film, the underlying layer of the actual printed part, it's called carrier film, is somewhat thick on some Tamiya decals, especially older kits. I haven't really looked at a newer kit lately, but they're kind of thick, and a lot of people don't like that because once you get the kit assembled, painted, and then apply the decals, if you decide to weather the vehicle and make it look dirty or whatever, during that process, the edge of the decal carrier film, which should be invisible, becomes visible because it kind of picks up paint and stuff like that. But the plus side of them being that thick, especially for a beginner, it's less likely that you'll tear the decal as you're putting it on the model. So I'm trying to look at the positives here. They're thick, yeah, but you're not going to tear them as easily. And there's a way to get around that thick carrier film. There's ways to kind of minimize that. And I'll talk about that once we get into painting and all that kind of stuff. But one thing to note on Tamiya decals, and this is pretty much across the board with their brand, is the printing is done really well. And you may run into the phraseology in register or out of register when talking about decals. And basically what that means is how centered and how lined up the colors are on the decal. For instance, in this decal sheet, I'm just guessing, but I'm sure that the first color they laid down to print was white because there's a lot of white on here. Then over top of that, they put the black. So when they print it, they have to make sure it's in register or lined up correctly, so that way you have a nice, symmetrical, even print. On this Balkenkreuz, for instance, if it was out of register, or in other words, if this black was printed just slightly off center to the white, you'd have a thick white line on one side, thin on the other, and it just wouldn't line up. And when you put that on the kit, it's gonna look funky. It's not gonna look good at all. And it's really important when you have multiple colors that things are in register, so when you put it on there, it looks like a paint applied decal or a paint applied marking, which is the way they did it on the real vehicles. They use paint. So their decals are always in register, and they work really well. They're easy to use, and they just look really good, and they give you a good variety of markings. 4 different versions you can do with these markings. So that's basically it on this kit. I am going to do a build, kind of a build log on the on my channel. It's not going to be real detailed. I'm not going to like video every single step. I may video the beginnings of a step, and just to give some pointers on how to do things and what to look for, because I want to keep it interesting. I want to keep it moving. I don't want to have just a lot of tedious build stuff, especially when you're doing stuff like wheels. That could take forever. But feel free, if you have any questions or comments as we go along, to post them in the comment section below, and I will answer those to the best of my abilities. So my next video will probably be more along the lines of my workstation and how I have it set up, and kind of give you an insight as to how I like my work area set up, and maybe it'll give you some ideas for your own work area. If you have one already, maybe it'll give you some new ideas, or if you don't have one at all, maybe it'll help you, set up your first workstation. But that will be my next video, I think, and then I'll start posting up some videos. They probably won't be as long as this, talking about different build aspects of this model, and we'll just kind of build it together, so to speak. Okay, so with that, I think we'll call it a day, and thanks for stopping by and watching another video on my channel, Plastic Models by a Regular Dude. And feel free to subscribe. Again, feel free to leave comments, and with that, we'll call it a day. See you next time.